Long marriages. When love fades into exhaustion. Why do so many women start resenting their husbands as they get older? The answer isn't what most men think. It's not always about big fights, betrayal, or even falling out of love. The reason is much more subtle, much more practical, and it happens slowly, over time. Did you know that over 60% of long-term married couples report feeling emotionally distant at some point? And for many women, that distance turns into something deeper, a quiet resentment that builds year after year. Maybe you've noticed it. Your wife isn't as affectionate as she used to be. She seems quieter. She spends more time alone. And one day, you realize, she's not just distant. She's tired. She's frustrated, and in some ways, she's starting to dislike you. It doesn't happen overnight. It starts when the small things disappear, the appreciation, the curiosity, the little gestures that made her feel seen. And if those things fade long enough, so does her desire to stay emotionally close. The good news? This can be fixed. Love doesn't disappear, it gets neglected. And just as it fades, it can be reignited. In this video, we're going to talk about why so many women, after decades of marriage, begin to feel disconnected from their husbands, and what you can do before it's too late. If you've ever wondered why your wife seems different, why she doesn't talk to you like she used to, or why she feels more like a roommate than a partner, this might be the most important video you'll watch. And if you're a woman who has felt unseen in your marriage, know this, you're not alone. Your feelings are valid, and today, we're going to talk about the real reasons relationships change over time, and how to turn things around before the distance becomes permanent. So stay with me until the end. If this video resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. If you found value in what we talked about, hit that like button. It really helps. And let's start a conversation in the comments. Just type 1 if you believe small actions can reignite a marriage, or 0 if you think love naturally fades over time. I'd love to hear your thoughts, because the more we talk about these things, the more we can learn from each other. 1. The weight of emotional labor. I've lived long enough to see how the weight of emotional labor settles onto a woman's shoulders, quietly, gradually, until one day, she realizes she's been carrying the whole world while her husband walks beside her, unburdened. When I was young, I thought my role was simple: work hard, provide, and everything else would take care of itself. I never stopped to ask, who was making sure everything else happened? My wife did. She remembered birthdays, planned holidays, scheduled doctor's visits, kept track of the small yet essential details that held our family together. And I took it for granted. At first, she reminded me of things. Then, she simply did them herself. She stopped asking for help, not because she didn't need it, but because she no longer expected it. She wasn't angry. She wasn't resentful. But she had given up hoping that I would share the weight. I think back to the times she asked for my opinion, and I said, "Whatever you want, dear." I thought I was being easygoing, but really, I was making her handle it alone. Or when she mentioned a family gathering, and I acted like it was news, even though she had told me before. It wasn't forgetfulness, it was carelessness. Men, we don't mean to be indifferent. But that's what happens when we assume everything is fine simply because she isn't complaining. But here's the truth, it's never too late to change. Women don't need grand gestures. They don't need an extravagant trip to make up for years of unseen effort. What they need is for us to notice, to step in before they have to ask, to share the invisible weight they've carried for so long. If she mentions a friend's birthday, write it down. Don't wait for her reminder. If she's planning a holiday, offer to take something off her plate. If she asks you to handle dinner, don't just cook, plan the meal, shop for it, clean up afterward. The first time I did it all, My wife looked at me, surprised, and laughed. "I didn't know you could do this." There was no resentment, only warmth. And I realized, sometimes, the smallest effort lifts the heaviest weight. Love isn't about apologies for the past. It's about being present now. It's about showing, every day, that she's not alone in this life. If you're lucky enough to have a woman who has carried the weight for years, remember this. She deserves to be loved the way she has loved you. Because happiness isn't one person holding everything together while the other simply exists beside them. Happiness is carrying the weight together. But here's the thing. When one person carries the weight alone, something else starts to fade too. The connection, the conversations. It's not just about the work. It's about how we stop talking, stop asking, stop listening. And before we know it, the silence between us grows louder than the words we used to share. 2. The decline of meaningful communication. I remember when my wife and I used to talk for hours. We'd sit on the porch late into the night, sharing our dreams, our fears, the life we wanted to build together. There was excitement in our voices, curiosity in our questions. We didn't just hear each other, we listened. But something happens over the years. Slowly, without even realizing it, the deep conversations fade. We stop asking about each other's thoughts and settle into routine. How was your day? Did you get the mail? What's for dinner? It's not that we stop caring. We just assume we already know everything there is to know. But let me tell you something I've learned. You never stop discovering the person you love. If you do, it's not because they've stopped changing. It's because you've stopped paying attention. And that's when the distance begins. I've seen it happen in my own marriage. My wife used to tell me about the books she was reading, the ideas she was exploring. Somewhere along the way, I stopped asking. Not because I wasn't interested, but because I assumed she would always share. But people don't share when they don't feel heard. And it's not just the big conversations that matter. It's the small ones. It's noticing when she's had a long day and asking more than just, "Are you okay?" It's putting down your phone, looking into her eyes, and really listening, not just waiting for your turn to speak. I once heard that love isn't lost in grand betrayals. It's lost in 1,000 small moments of neglect. And I believe that, because I've lived it. So how do you bring back the connection? It's simpler than you think. Start asking real questions again. What's been on your mind lately? If you could do anything right now, what would it be? What's something you wish people understood about you? And when she answers, listen. Not just to the words, but to the meaning behind them. Make her feel like she still matters. Because she does. But here's something else I've learned. Sometimes, words aren't enough. Love is also about presence. Sitting together in comfortable silence. Holding her hand during a movie. Leaving a note on the counter that simply says, "I was thinking about you." Love isn't just about the big declarations. It's about the quiet, everyday moments that remind someone they are still seen, still valued, still loved. If there's one thing I know for sure, it's this. There's no such thing as nothing left to say. There's always more, if you're willing to listen. But here's the thing. When we stop listening, we also stop noticing. And when we stop noticing, responsibilities start falling onto one person's shoulders without the other even realizing it. That's how we end up in a home where one person does most of the work, while the other assumes it just gets done on its own. Have you noticed that the deep conversations in your relationship have faded over time? Comment 1 if yes, or 0 if no. Let's see how many of us have felt this shift. 3. The never-ending burden of housework. I'll tell you something funny. When I was younger, I thought housework just sort of happened. The laundry got done, the dishes got washed, the floors stayed clean, and I never really stopped to wonder how. Then one day, my wife went away for a week to visit her sister, and suddenly, I was standing in front of a sink full of dishes, wondering where all my clean socks had gone. That was the first time it hit me: the house didn't run itself. Housework isn't just chores, it's responsibility. It's the quiet, never-ending labor that keeps a home from falling apart. And if one person is carrying most of that load, especially after decades of marriage, it doesn't take long for exhaustion to settle in. My wife never outright asked for help. She didn't nag, she didn't complain. But I saw it in the way she sighed when she picked up my socks for the 100th time, in the way she rubbed her temples as she cleaned up a mess she didn't make. I had a choice. I could keep assuming she'd handle everything, or I could step up. So I started small, doing the dishes without being asked, folding the laundry before she had to remind me. And you know what happened? She smiled more, she laughed more, she seemed lighter. Because love isn't about dividing chores down the middle. It's about showing up, in the little things, every day. I think a lot of men fall into the trap of believing that because they worked hard outside the home, they've already done their part. But let me tell you, after retirement, that excuse doesn't hold up. I remember my friend Bill, who retired a few years before me. His wife, Linda, was exhausted all the time, even though they were both home all day. "I don't get it," Bill told me. "We're retired. Why is she still stressed?" I asked him a simple question. "Who's doing the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry?" He got real quiet after that. Retirement should be a time where both partners enjoy life together, not where one keeps working while the other finally relaxes. If your wife has carried the household for decades, now is the time to lighten her load. And I don't mean waiting until she asks. I mean noticing what needs to be done and doing it. See an overflowing trash bin? Take it out. Dishes in the sink? Wash them. If you don't know how to do laundry, learn. You spent years mastering skills for work. This is no different. And let me tell you, the rewards go far beyond a clean house. When my wife no longer felt like she was running the household alone, she had more energy, more joy, more time for us. We started taking evening walks together again, lingering over coffee instead of her rushing to finish chores. I saw the difference in her, and I felt it in our marriage. So if you're thinking, well, my wife never complains, so she must not mind doing it all, let me tell you, she minds. She just might be too tired to keep saying it. The good news is, it's never too late to change. And when you do, you'll find that a little effort goes a long way, not just in keeping the house running, but in keeping the love alive. Because at the heart of it, housework isn't just about chores, it's about feeling like a team. And when that feeling fades, so does something even more important. The bond between two people starts to loosen until one day, they realize they're living separate lives under the same roof. 4. Growing apart instead of together. I've seen this happen in my own life and in the lives of many friends. At the start of a marriage, a couple shares dreams of adventures and quiet evenings together. But one day, they realize they are no longer walking the same path. The change is subtle. She picks up new interests, reading, painting, yoga, while he remains in his routines, content in his comfort zone. At first, he nods along, supportive but uninvolved. Over time, the distance between them grows, and they become two people living under the same roof but in separate worlds. I remember Jim and Carol, together for over 40 years. Carol loved learning, books, history, photography, while Jim preferred his morning coffee and newspaper. He believed retirement was for resting, but Carol still wanted more from life. One day, she told Jim about a planned trip to Greece. Instead of excitement, he dismissed it. At our age, why bother? In that moment, she realized he wasn't just uninterested in the trip. He was uninterested in growing with her. Men don't mean to fall behind, but we resist change. We think, I've worked all my life, can't I just relax? But there's a difference between resting and becoming stagnant. If one person keeps growing while the other stands still, the distance between them widens, sometimes beyond repair. I've made this mistake myself. When my wife was excited about a painting class, I laughed and said, "Why start now?" I didn't see the sadness in her eyes until later that night when she sat in front of an unfinished canvas, brush in hand but unwilling to paint. That's when I understood. I didn't need to love painting, but I needed to care about what made her happy. Marriage isn't about being the same but about staying connected. You don't need to love what your spouse loves, but you can listen, show interest, and encourage. If she dreams of travel, ask about it. If she takes up a hobby, support her. It's the small efforts that keep you close. I've seen elderly couples sit together in silence, not out of anger, but because they have nothing left to share. Don't let that happen. One day, you may look across the table and realize you let your partner walk alone for too long. If your wife is excited about something today, listen. If she wants to try something new, support her. Because as long as you keep growing together, your marriage remains a journey worth taking. But when you stop growing together, something else starts to fade too. The closeness, the intimacy. It's not about passion disappearing overnight. It's about the slow, quiet moments where you stop reaching for each other, stop touching, stop looking at each other the way you once did. And before you even realize it, you're just coexisting. Have you ever felt like you and your partner were slowly drifting apart, even while living under the same roof? Comment 1 if yes, or 0 if no. I'm curious to see how common this really is. 5. The loss of physical and emotional intimacy. I've heard many men my age say their wives have grown distant, as if it happened overnight. "She's just not interested in me anymore," they say, shaking their heads. But intimacy doesn't just disappear, it fades, slipping away in the spaces where effort used to be, in the quiet moments when we stop reaching for each other, assuming love will sustain itself without care. I've learned that intimacy isn't just about physical closeness. It's about feeling seen, valued, and knowing you still matter to the person who has walked beside you for decades. When that feeling fades, the distance becomes more than emotional, it becomes something you can feel. In the quiet dinners where words are few. In the way you instinctively turn away at night, not from anger, but out of habit. I remember a time when my wife and I barely touched, not because of a fight, but because we had simply stopped. She had her routines, I had mine. And I'll admit, I had stopped doing the little things. I stopped reaching for her hand, stopped brushing a strand of hair from her face, stopped looking at her like I used to. I never stopped loving her, but I stopped showing it. And she felt that. Intimacy isn't about grand gestures. It's about small, everyday moments of connection. Sitting next to her instead of across from her. Holding her gaze a little longer when she speaks. Touching her hand just because. Pulling her close when she stands at the sink. It's about saying, "I see you. I still choose you." Some men think intimacy fades because their wives have changed. But maybe it's because we stopped making them feel wanted, not just physically, but emotionally. A woman wants to feel she still excites you, still catches your eye, not just because she's there, but because you truly see her. I remember waking up one night and seeing my wife sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. "What's wrong?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nothing," she whispered. But in that moment, I knew it wasn't nothing. It was everything we had lost in the silence between us. Love isn't lost in big moments. It's lost in the absence of the small ones. The good news? Those moments are easy to bring back. Hold her hand. Tell her she's beautiful. Notice the way she laughs. Pay attention, because one day, you might reach for her and realize you don't even remember the last time you did. But it doesn't have to be that way. Love isn't gone. It's just waiting for you to reach out and bring it back. For a while, you might not even notice how far apart you've grown. Life keeps you busy, distractions fill the gaps. But then comes retirement, and suddenly, you have nothing but time. Time to see the cracks. Time to feel the silence. And if you're not careful, time to realize that the person sitting across from you feels like a stranger. 6. Retirement brings unexpected challenges. I used to think retirement would be the best chapter of my life. No more deadlines, no more work stress, just time to travel, relax, and enjoy life. But no one warns you about the quiet challenges that come with suddenly having endless free time and nowhere to be. And for many men, the biggest adjustment isn't just figuring out what to do, it's realizing their wives may not be as excited about this together all the time phase as they are. I remember waking up that first month after retirement, feeling like I had all the time in the world. My wife, on the other hand, still had her routines, her responsibilities, her to-do list. The only difference? Now I was around for all of it. At first, I thought it was great, more time to talk, more time to be together. But she wasn't quite as thrilled. I'd follow her around, asking, "What's for lunch?" or "What are we doing today?" as if she had suddenly become my daily planner. She didn't complain at first, just sighed, those small sighs that say more than words ever could. Then one day, she turned to me and said, "I've spent decades managing the house, raising kids, taking care of everything. Now you're retired, and you expect me to manage your free time, too?" That hit me hard, not because she was angry, but because she was right. I had been so focused on leaving work behind that I never considered what I was bringing into our home. My own boredom, my own need for purpose. Without a job, I felt lost. And without realizing it, I had placed the burden of filling that void on her. I've seen many men go through this, and let me tell you, it can put a strain on even the strongest marriages. When work gives you structure, it's easy to rely on your wife to become your new sense of purpose. But the truth is, she's been busy all along. She has her own routines, her own way of doing things. And if we don't learn to carve out our own path, our presence can start to feel suffocating instead of comforting. So what's the solution? Find something that belongs to you. A hobby, a project, a group of friends, anything that gives you a reason to wake up in the morning that isn't just waiting for her to entertain you. For me, it was learning to cook. At first, I just wanted to make breakfast so she wouldn't have to. But before long, I found myself experimenting, reading cookbooks, even enjoying it. It gave me something to focus on, something to contribute. And, maybe most importantly, it gave my wife the space she needed to enjoy her own retirement, too. Retirement isn't just about having free time. It's about making sure that free time doesn't become a burden on the person you love. If you're struggling to adjust, ask yourself, are you filling your days, or are you waiting for her to fill them for you? The sooner you find your own sense of purpose, the sooner retirement becomes what it was meant to be, a time of joy, balance, and truly enjoying each other's company, without the weight of unspoken expectations. But there's something else retirement makes you face, something even bigger than schedules and routines. It makes you realize just how little time you have left. And for some people, that realization comes too late. If you or someone you know has struggled with adjusting to retirement, was it harder than expected? Comment 1 if yes, or 0 if no. Let's see how many of us have faced this challenge. 7. The realization that life is short. I'll tell you something about getting older. it changes the way you see time. When you're young, it feels like you have forever. There's always next year, always another chance, always time to fix things later. But then, one day, you start losing people. A friend passes away, a sibling, a neighbor you used to chat with. And suddenly, you realize there's no such thing as forever. There's only now. I've seen this realization hit women in long marriages. The moment they wake up and think, is this how I want to spend the rest of my life? It's not about dramatic fights or betrayal. It's quieter than that. It's years of feeling unseen. Years of giving love, care, and patience without receiving the same in return. And one day, they decide they don't want to spend the time they have left feeling lonely inside their own home. I remember Margaret, a woman in my community. She was married for over 50 years, raised 3 kids, and never forgot an anniversary. She always put her family first. But around the time she turned 70, she started to change. She signed up for painting classes. She went out with friends more often. Her husband, Frank, didn't understand. She used to be happy just staying home with me, he said. But that was the thing. She had never truly been happy just staying home. She had settled for it. And now, with time feeling shorter, she wasn't willing to settle anymore. Some men don't see this coming. They think everything is fine because their wife still makes dinner, still shares the same bed. But they don't realize she may have already left in the ways that matter, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And once a woman checks out like that, it's hard to bring her back. So what do? You don't wait until she's already distant. You don't wait until she's making plans that don't include you. You start now. Show her that she's not just part of the routine. Surprise her. Ask about her dreams. Not the ones she had at 20, but the ones she has now. And most importantly, listen. Really listen. Because the biggest regret I've heard from men who lost their wives, either to time or to emotional distance, is this: I thought we had more time. We don't. None of us do. So if you love her, show her. Not someday. Not when it's too late. Now. If there's one thing I've learned after all these years, it's this: love doesn't disappear overnight, and it doesn't have to be lost forever. It fades in the quiet moments we overlook, in the words left unsaid, in the small gestures we stop making. But just as it fades, it can be rekindled, with attention, with effort, and with the simple act of choosing each other, every single day. A happy, fulfilling marriage in the later years isn't built on grand romantic gestures or rewriting the past. It's built in the present, in the way you truly listen, truly see, and truly appreciate the person who has stood beside you through it all. So don't wait until it's too late. If you've felt the distance growing, start now. Small actions make the biggest difference. Notice her, the way she sighs at the end of the day, the way she lights up when talking about something new, the small things she does for you that you've overlooked. Ask real questions, not just, how was your day? But, what's been on your mind lately? Or, is there something you wish I understood better? And when she answers, really listen. Thank her for the things she's done for years without recognition. Compliment her, not out of habit, but because you truly see her. Sit next to her instead of across. Hold her hand. Look at her the way you did when you were younger. Don't wait for her to grow distant. Don't wait for regret. Choose her now. Choose her every day. And before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell me, what's one small thing you'll do differently starting today? Let's start the conversation. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more insights like this. If today's message spoke to you, give this video a like. It helps bring these conversations to more people who need them. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself. Take care of your relationships. And I'll see you in the next video.